Tantor Audio presents As If, the oral history of Clueless, as told by Amy Heckerling, the cast, and the crew, by Jen Chaney. Narrated by Jorjeana Marie. Introduction. In mid-July of 1995, when American culture was fixated on such matters as O.J. Simpson's ill-fitting glove, TLC's insistence on not chasing waterfalls, and the box office domination of Batman Forever, Pocahontas, and Apollo 13, the fact that a modestly budgeted teen movie called Clueless was about to arrive in theaters, become a major hit for Paramount Pictures, catapult the careers of its stars, influence fashion for 2 decades, and become a permanent cultural touchstone for multiple generations, well, let's just say it was something most people couldn't predict at the time. You can't blame them, really. They were very busy focusing on the rivers and the lakes they were used to. Executives at Paramount Pictures, the studio that took on the film after others, regretfully it would turn out, passed on the project, had great confidence in writer-director Amy Heckerling's shiny girly comedy about a shopaholic Beverly Hills teenager, with a few Jane Austen DNA molecules in her genetic code. Sherry Lansing, then the head of the studio, liked it so much that after screening it, she didn't have a single story note. She said, "This is fantastic. I don't have anything I think you should change," remembers Adam Schroeder, one of the film's producers. It's not like Clueless was flying entirely below the public's radar. The comedy benefited from some serious promotional juice courtesy of MTV, which, like Paramount, was part of the Viacom family, and pitched the film heavily to its real-world addicted Gen X and Y audience. Media buzz about the breakout potential of Alicia Silverstone, then best known for her appearances in a trio of Aerosmith videos and the thriller The Crush, in which she stalked a post-Princess Bride, pre-Saw Carrie Elwes, also started to build well before the film's release. Entertainment Weekly splashed an image of Silverstone in a shimmery baby doll dress on its cover in March of '95, headlining it with the supremely confident statement, "A star is made." If all goes as planned, the coming months will witness Silverstone's transformation from gym locker pinup to household name, the story read. En route to theaters are Silverstone's True Crime, a thriller in which a Catholic schoolgirl turns gumshoe, Le Nouveau Monde, a Gaelic coming-of-age story directed by Alain Corneau, and most notably, Clueless, a teen comedy due this July that's described by its creators as a Rodeo Drive version of Jane Austen's Emma. Most notably was, it turned out, an understatement. But in Hollywood, even a gorgeous on-the-rise young starlet and a director with a track record for making profitable hits, see Heckerling's Fast Times at Ridgemont High, European Vacation, and the Look Who's Talking pics, do not guarantee success. Given the landscape for teen movies at the time, it's understandable that industry insiders and observers weren't necessarily sure that Clueless would click with ticket buyers. While TV shows and movies about adolescents and young adults had not disappeared entirely from the landscape, the high school movie as a bankable genre had more or less petered out by 1995. Then, Clueless made its debut on July 19, 1995, a Wednesday, and became the #1 movie in the country that day. The weekend of July 21st through the 23rd, it generated $10.6 million. It was the #2 movie in America for that 3-day period, right behind Apollo 13, and immediately was branded as one of the summer's most unexpected triumphs. In the midst of a summer of mostly desultory films, along came Clueless, said a New York Times piece that ran the Monday after that strong debut, confirming in print that it had emerged as a sleeper hit of the summer. The movie went on to earn $56.6 million in the U.S. and Canada, a figure that Hollywood data tracking site Box Office Mojo equates to $105.7 million in contemporary inflated dollars. That's a nice return for a film whose production budget landed in the $13 million range. Reviews were positive as well. Heckerling walks a fine line between satire and put-on, but she finds it, and her dialogue could be anthologized, wrote Roger Ebert. New York Magazine critic David Denby proclaimed it a comedy of goodness that made the nastiness of a smart teen movie like Heathers seem like a failure of imagination. In the New York Times, Janet Maslin called the movie as eye-catching and cheery as its star. More importantly, Clueless touched a chord in the culture that was clearly primed and ready to be struck. Preteen and teen girls, some of whom would eventually grow up to share their Clueless love with their own daughters, raced to malls in search of plaid skirts and knee-high socks, surprising higher-ups at major department stores who had not anticipated the hordes of wannabe share shoppers. Almost immediately, Paramount began working with Heckerling to develop a TV show adaptation. Within a year, the movie's soundtrack would sell enough copies to be certified gold. It would eventually reach platinum status. The success of Clueless also would defibrillate the barely breathing high school movie genre, resulting in a flood of teen movies in the late 90s and early 2000s, many of which featured Cher-esque female protagonists, and blatantly targeted the young XX chromosome demographic that had made Clueless such a smash. Career doors began to open wider for almost everyone involved after the movie came out, most notably Silverstone. At the age of 18 and mere weeks after Clueless sent her industry stock into the stratosphere, she inked a reported $10 million deal with Columbia Pictures that made headlines in the trades and elsewhere. Suddenly, it felt like the whole world was making a cameo at the Val party. Coverage of Silverstone went from excessive to inescapable, with stories and photos of her everywhere in Vanity Fair, Time, and New York Magazine, and on the cover of Rolling Stone, where she dressed in all pink and parked her frilly bikinied bottom next to the headline, Ballad of a Teen Queen. Entertainment Weekly name-checked both Austen, whose Emma inspired the Clueless narrative, and Silverstone in its year-end list of the most significant entertainers of 1995, while Vanity Fair's 1996 Hollywood issue featured Heckerling in an Annie Leibovitz photo spread focused on the industry's most influential female filmmakers. Heckerling also won an award for Best Screenplay from the National Society of Film Critics and was nominated for Best Original Screenplay by the Writers Guild of America. The media credited Clueless for, as New York Times columnist Peggy Orenstein put it, proving there's a market for movies in which girls are in charge of their own fates, active rather than reactive. What's even more remarkable is that 20 years later, Clueless is still as omnipresent in American culture as it was back then. Thanks to its presence on cable, DVD, and streaming services like Netflix and Amazon Instant Video, Clueless is still watched on a regular basis by longtime fans, as well as young people discovering the magic of Murray's freshly shaved head for the first time. Tributes to the movie, in the form of Twitter accounts, BuzzFeed listicles, and startup tech companies that encourage users to dress their bodies just like Cher does in Clueless, are ubiquitous in the digital sphere. Fashion designers and labels continue to riff on the costumes created for the film by Mona May. Are you in a Macy's, H&M, or Urban Outfitters like right now? Stop. Look around. There's probably a sheer shirt, a pleated miniskirt, or some knee-highs in your field of vision that, thanks to the circle of life nature of fashion trends, easily could have been yanked out of Cher Horowitz's ridiculously substantial closet. The idea of molding Jane Austen's narrative structures and themes into something more modern? That has been everywhere post-Clueless, from Austenland to web series like The Lizzie Bennet Diaries and Emma Approved. The influence of the film can be seen in the pop cultural creations of some high-profile influencers of today's girls and young women, including Katy Perry, Lena Dunham, Tavi Gevinson, Mindy Kaling, and Iggy Azalea, just for starters. I mean, when Azalea, the Aussie rapper, decided to make a music video for Fancy, otherwise known as the most inescapable song on planet Earth during the year 2014, to what 1995 film did she opt to pay homage? Hint, it wasn't Waterworld, y'all. Clueless, then, isn't merely a touchstone for the 90s generation. It's a teen movie that continues to be passed from one generation to the next, and is just timeless enough for every generation to think it's speaking directly to them. So how did it all happen? How did Amy Heckerling come up with the idea to bend and twist 19th century England into an exaggerated luminescent version of Beverly Hills circa the mid-1990s? How did Silverstone, Paul Rudd, and others get cast in this movie, and who else was considered for their roles? What was the vibe in the classroom during the filming of the debate scene that taught us all how to mispronounce the word Haitians? Or during the robbery scene that taught us all what an alaya was? Why does this movie still resonate so much with so many people 2 decades later? Those are all questions that this book will answer, along with some incredibly nitpicky ones that only serious fans would be inclined to ask. Questions like, who painted that picture of Cher's mother that hangs in the foyer of the Horowitz household? What's the deal with the hair clip that Cher wears on her date with Christian? And in what way is it connected to Amanda Bynes? Swear to God, there really is a connection. What happened to all of Cher's costumes after production wrapped? Who described his experience at the premiere of Clueless, held on Malibu Zuma Beach and broadcast on MTV, by noting that he got white boy wasted? Forget it. I'll just tell you the answer to that. Coolio. It was Coolio. But this complete history of Clueless is about more than just fun pieces of trivia. Using material gathered from more than 80 interviews with people who worked on the film, as well as professors, fashion experts, industry insiders, cultural critics, and fans of the movie, this book will tell the story of how hard it was, and often still is, for a female filmmaker with a point of view to get a movie greenlighted in Hollywood. It will explain why so many Jane Austen scholars consider Clueless a film some initially and wrongly dismissed as nothing more than a fun romp about a ditz with a credit card. The best Jane Austen adaptation ever made. It will shed light on the amount of work, creativity, and craft that went into making Clueless look so effortlessly bright and glossy. It will delve more deeply into how Clueless used fantasy to create a world that, in a way, achieves a social ideal that reality can't quite match. A place where a gay kid is accepted among his peers, where young girls are empowered to be their confident selves, and where the best friendship between a white girl and a black girl is so natural that no one bothers to bat a heavily mascaraed eyelash in its direction. This book will do a lot of other things, too, as you'll hear when you start listening. This book is written primarily in an oral history format. The material in that oral history was gathered from interviews conducted while I was working on a 2013 Vulture piece about the Val Party scene. The director's cut version of that piece is in part 2, and during extensive interviews conducted specifically for the book. Memories of things that happened 20 years ago can sometimes get a little fuzzy. When cast or crew members occasionally recollected the same event a little differently, I have presented both sides of the story. I also relied heavily on the movie's 144-page production report to verify information, particularly regarding exactly when and where certain scenes were shot. When writing a book like this, it's inevitable that some key people, including cast members and musical artists who contributed to the soundtrack, will either not wish to participate or won't be available to do so to the extent that I hoped. For that reason, I occasionally use quotes from interviews published or broadcast by other media outlets. Some quotes, from both my interviews and elsewhere, have been condensed in order to allow the narrative to flow more seamlessly. This has always been done in a way that keeps the meaning of the source's words intact. One final thought, for now, on what makes Clueless so special. As I spoke to various people about the film and rewatched it, both in pieces and in its entirety, repeatedly, while working on this book, I was struck by how much it exists within the context of its era as well as outside of it. As many Tumblrs, tweets, and online comments can attest, Clueless is one of those movies that really gets 90s nostalgia motors revving. Which makes total sense. But at the risk of sounding like way philosophical, one of the more remarkable things about Clueless is that it seems to exist almost across time. This is a movie that uses a story first published in 1815 as its narrative blueprint. Yet it's also a movie that's steeped in the music and pop culture references of the 1990s, the time of Marky Mark pants dropping and catchy Mentos ads. And somehow it's also a movie that, through a combination of Heckerling genius and glorious accident, managed to predict how we live now. In 1995, the idea that two friends would stand right beside each other while talking on their cell phones was a hilarious joke. Now, it's a snapshot of our daily existence, although now we speak less and text more. When Amy Heckerling decided that Cher should activate a snazzy computer program that allows her to dress herself like a virtual paper doll, do you know what Amy Heckerling did? She invented the freaking fashion app. Young women certainly asserted their opinions with Cher's brash confidence before Clueless, and culturally speaking, were doing so pretty actively around the time the movie was released. But on the internet, an even broader swath of female voices can be heard. In outlets like Jezebel, The Hairpin, Rookie Magazine, and Slate, as well as on various social media platforms. Often, the women sharing the most compelling and well-reasoned points are women who grew up on Clueless, which suggests that even if Cher doesn't know how to say Spartacus, she may have, in some small way, shown young ladies how to stand up and speak for themselves. Clueless, then, is something that's simultaneously past and present and future. Watching it may sometimes make us ache for a back then, when we had just graduated from college, or were in high school, or watched it during our first middle school sleepover. But the reason it's so good as only a handful of teen movies can legitimately claim to be, is because every time you turn it on, it also feels very right now. Part 1. Before Clueless. From yes to no to yes again. How Clueless got off the ground. Amy Heckerling kicked off her career as a Hollywood director with a movie that became a perennially quotable teen classic, 1982's Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Though its sensibility was different from that of Clueless, Fast Times was steeped in much more reality than Cher's fluffy, feathery fantasyland. The movie became culturally significant for many of the same reasons Clueless later would too. Like Clueless, Fast Times launched the then still early careers of several impeccably cast, promising young actors, including Sean Penn, Jennifer Jason Leigh, Phoebe Cates, and Forest Whitaker. It featured dialogue as scripted by Cameron Crowe that seemed to enter the lexicon the second it emanated from Cineplex speakers, and it forever embedded several iconic movie moments, most notably Phoebe Cates' slow-mo removal of that red bikini top into the collective memory of a generation. Fast Times became a touchstone movie for teens of the 1980s, the same way that Clueless would for teens in the decade that followed. Though Heckerling would spend the rest of the 1980s exploring other cinematic worlds, including ones involving gangsters, Johnny Dangerously, Griswolds, European Vacation, and babies that sound like Bruce Willis. Look Who's Talking. It wasn't surprising that in the early 1990s, she would again feel compelled to revisit high school hallways. Initially, that was something that 20th Century Fox actively encouraged her to do. In 1993, Heckerling began developing a TV show for Fox that focused on the popular kids at a California high school, including a central female character fueled by relentless reserves of optimism. At that point, the project was called No Worries, one of several names used. I Was a Teenager was another, before Clueless earned its official title status. Given Heckerling's established skill and success with coming-of-age comedy, it seems like No Worries should have come together with, well, no worries, or at least very few. But that wasn't the case. In its formative stages, the project eventually known as Clueless went from potential Fox TV show to potential Fox feature film and then, for a short but frustrating period before landing at Paramount, almost didn't happen at all. Its path to the big screen is a tale about a filmmaker inventing a very positive character, then dealing with frustration, Hollywood sexism, and rejection, but ultimately finding the support to make her movie by staying true to her vision. It's also a tale in which Heckerling explains the connection between her own family and the ex-step-sibling romance between Josh and Cher. Amy Heckerling, writer-director. I remember reading Emma. I remember reading Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. Those characters, what I gravitated to was how positive they could be. There's a word that's thrown around a lot now, entitled, which is a way older people can look at young people in a kind of negative way. But I always feel like people that have that optimism and feel like they can do things, there's something so endearing and charming about that. Because you know life will beat everybody down eventually. Maybe not everybody, but many people. There's something very life-affirming to see that quality in people. So I like those characters. One of, obviously, my favorite characters in Fast Times is Spicoli, because it doesn't occur to him that, the teacher will think badly of him for coming in late, wanting to surf, any of that. He doesn't mean anything negative about anybody else, and it wouldn't occur to him that they're thinking that about him. There was an episode of Gidget that I saw, obviously, when I was a little kid. A friend of Gidget's father's had a student from Sweden or something come to stay with them. She was a big nerd and completely didn't know how to dress or act with boys or anything. Gidget took it upon herself to make her over. When Gidget made this girl over, the girl became very popular and actually started to go after Gidget's boyfriend. So I recall when I was first reading Emma that I was thinking, this is like that episode of Gidget. There are a lot of things in Gidget and Dobie Gillis and the Patty Duke Show where the teachers are referencing great literature and then the characters go off and have their own take on it. Twink Kaplan, associate producer of Clueless and Miss Geist. We started working together way back when she was doing European Vacation. We were best friends, Amy and I. She directed me when I acted, and then we became producing partners, and they were just wonderful, wonderful years. After Look Who's Talking 2, and a couple TV shows that we tried to do, Amy came up with this idea of Clueless that was a takeoff on Emma. It was so exciting. I was the sounding board. It was all Amy, her brain. I just loved her brain. Amy Heckerling. Sometimes you're working on things and you think, I have to write this, or I'd better look at my notes. And other times you just want to. That was how I felt writing Cher. I just wanted to be in that world, and in her mindset. All of the Clueless characters were in the original TV pilot. Well, not all the guys, but Cher and Dion, and her father and the teacher, Mr. Hall. In the pilot, she was a rich girl that wanted a high-fashion grunge outfit so that a boy would think that she was smart, because that was what she thought smart people wore. Eventually, the TV people put it in turnaround, and I was very frustrated. I'd moved to a new agency then. That's when Ken Stovitz became my agent, and I showed him that pilot, and he said, "This is a movie." Ken Stovitz, Amy Heckerling's agent. You know, when you get into business with someone, you find out what really is the home run, dream come true. And early on, she told me about this project, so I said, all right, if I can do anything for her, I'm going to do what I can to get this made. Amy Heckerling. Then Fox Movies bought it from Fox TV. Ken Stovitz. I think it was under Fox film executive Elizabeth Gabler's purview, and she was nothing but totally supportive in everything. But eventually she couldn't get it made there. Amy Heckerling. She was a real champion of the project. A smart woman, familiar with Jane Austen, and somebody you could talk to about characters and structure, and really loved it. She was a pleasure to work with. She was so passionate that when her bosses put it in turnaround, she was so upset, like in tears. So I love her. Twink Kaplan. I remember one of the Fox executives thought it would be better if the boys were more prominent. It wasn't about that. It was about these girls. Amy Heckerling. During the development, there was a concern that it was too much about one female, and that I should make Josh a bigger part, and he should be living next door, and his mother should be in love with her father. They weren't ex-stepbrother and ex-stepsister. They thought that was incestuous. Like, what if the Brady Bunch got involved with each other? I didn't watch the Brady Bunch, so I couldn't really argue. The thing is, my grandparents were stepbrother and stepsister. In the Jewish ghetto in the Pale of Settlement in Europe, it was pretty verboten to have a female that was perceived as loose. My great-grandmother was a widow with children. For a female to be alone with children, there weren't opportunities. In this small little world, a woman that was not in a marriage was going to become destitute, and there'd be children involved. I mean, I'm not Isaac Singer, so I can't tell you exactly how life went there. But if there was a free-floating female, if your brother died and he had a wife and children, you would marry the woman and take care of the kids. Everybody took care of things rather than looked for the big love experience. My grandmother's father was a widower, and my grandfather's mother was a widow. My great-grandparents both had children, and so they got married. They all had grown children. Then my grandmother was a teenager, and she had an older stepbrother, totally not blood-related. When I was a kid, all she did was complain about her stepmother to me. Her evil stepmother, and how mean she was to her and would hide her in the closet when the social worker came, so she wasn't sent to school, and she could be kept at home to do the cleaning. But her stepbrother, whom she later married, was always a protector. They were married. They knew each other from the time they were teenagers. He was almost 100 when he died. She was in her late 80s. So they were fighting for, 80 years. I mean, fighting. But when one got sick, they were completely lost. They were so dependent on each other and so angry all the time with each other. Anyhow, they cracked me up. So it did not seem like a crazy thing to me for Josh and Cher to be together. When the studio tells you, ooh, this is incestuous, and you're going, this is my grandparents, I mean, it's the Jewish ghetto. You don't leave a woman out on the street because she has no money, and how will she feed the kids? Widowers marry widows, and that's how it is. And their respective children are not related. Twink Kaplan. So we went into turnaround, and I guess we started working out of Amy's house, actually. Which wasn't a bad thing, because I got a dog, Leon, a Maltese, and he played with Sir Mix-a-Lot, her Maltese. We were very depressed, though. Ken Stovitz. We had set it up at Fox. We couldn't get it going. I took it out once, twice, maybe 3 times to the rest of the community, and only the last time did we attach Alicia Silverstone based on the music video. What we submitted was the screenplay and the music video. I told everyone it was a $13 million movie. I gave them the budget. I gave them Amy's track record, which was, if you look at her ratio of cost to success, I think Look Who's Talking was done for $6.5 million, and I think it did $285 million. In those days, $13 million for a really polished movie, that movie today would cost, I'll take a guess and say, $35 million. Because everyone actually got paid. It wasn't like doing a movie where everyone worked for no money. We got rejected so many times it was a joke. Amy Heckerling. Ken just refused to let it die. He was a bulldog in pursuing it and pushing and not making me feel like it wasn't good, or I should be thinking of other things. He really was a champion. Ken Stovitz. Everyone in Hollywood wants to do what is in vogue at that time, and an unheard-of teenage girl movie that looks at the lunacy of how we live our lives and what importance we place on things and our crazy friends, I don't think they thought that people cared about it that much. Whatever was happening at that time wasn't that. Amy Heckerling.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?